She heard his name before she saw his face, and that was the only mercy the evening offered her. The announcement came from the far end of the grand hall, 3 words spoken by the herald in the formal tongue, and Marin Calloway stood very still in the middle of the crowd and let those words pass through her body like a blade that had already done its work years ago. Alpha King Kalen Duskmore, present, in attendance. At this assembly, which she had been told, by 3 separate people she had believed, he would not attend. She had rebuilt herself carefully. That was the thing no one understood about reconstruction. It was not dramatic. It was not the moment you stood up in the rain and declared you had survived. It was years of small choices. The decision to eat when you were not hungry because your body needed feeding. The decision to take the position in the Northern Territories even though the work was hard. And the winters were brutal, and there was no one waiting for you at the end of the day. The decision to stop your scent for traces of a bond that had been publicly severed. She had rebuilt, and she had believed herself rebuilt. And then they said his name, and her hands tightened on the stem of the glass and she was holding. And she understood in one clarifying, humiliating instant that some things do not finish healing just because you stop looking at the wound. Marin was 34 years old. She had not seen Kalen Duskmore in 6 years. She had grown her business from a single leased cabin in the high country to a network of 12 properties. She had learned to read weather patterns, to negotiate with pack councils, to track the faint mineral scent of underground springs that no map recorded. She had learned to be useful and independent and entirely, thoroughly fine. She looked toward the far end of the hall. He was standing near the high windows, and the candlelight was doing the same infuriating thing it had always done to him, catching the angles of his face and making something complicated out of them, gold and shadow in alternation. He was speaking to someone she did not recognize. He had not yet turned. She had approximately 40 seconds before someone in this hall noticed her noticing him, or before he turned on his own, and the question of what happened next became unavoidable. She put her glass down on a passing server's tray, straightened the dark green shoulder of her dress, and decided that 40 seconds was enough time to make a plan. It was not, as it turned out, nearly enough time, because before she had finished her first step toward the side gallery, the woman beside her, Counselor Veth, who Marin had always found well-meaning and catastrophically indiscreet, said, brightly and at full volume, "Marin Calloway, I didn't know you were coming. Does Kalen know you're here?" The question landed in a pocket of sudden conversational quiet, the way such questions always seem to, as if the universe had an opinion about public embarrassment. Marin kept her expression neutral. "I wouldn't think so," she said pleasantly. "We haven't spoken in some years." Counselor Veth blinked, apparently surprised that the history she was gesturing toward was not something Marin wished to elaborate on in the middle of a crowded assembly hall. "Of course," she said. "Of course, yes. You look wonderful, by the way. The northern work suits you." "Thank you," Marin said, and moved away before anything else could be said at volume, and did not let herself look back toward the windows. She had rebuilt herself carefully, was the thing. She had done it piece by piece, without fanfare in the cold. And she had come to this assembly because the council had requested a land rights presentation from her firm, and her firm was too new to afford the signal it would send if she declined a council request. She had come because it was the professional thing. She had come because she had believed he would not be here. His name had not been on the attendance list. She had checked. She found the side gallery and stepped into it and stood with her back against the cool stone wall and breathed. The gallery ran along the west side of the hall, lined with narrow windows that looked out over the valley below. Dark now, the distant pack settlements, visible only as scattered warm lights against the mountain black. She had stood in a gallery very much like this one 6 years ago after the assembly where he had stood before the full council and the gathered pack representatives and delivered the formal severance. His voice had been even. He had not looked at her. She had rebuilt herself carefully, and she was here, and she was fine. She heard footsteps and turned, expecting Veth or someone from her firm, and found instead that the man who had just stepped into the gallery was Kalen Duskmore, and that he had already stopped walking and that his eyes were on her face, with an expression she could not immediately name. The candlelight was doing it again. She wished it would stop. Neither of them spoke for a moment that was long enough to be a problem. Then Marin said, in the voice she used for difficult negotiations, "I was told you weren't attending." I wasn't planning to, he said. His voice was the same. She had wondered about that sometimes. In the way you wonder about things you have no reason to wonder about anymore, whether it would be the same. It was. The itinerary changed this afternoon. I came directly from the eastern border. I see, she said. He was looking at her in a way that she did not know what to do with, not with pity, which she had braced for, not with the careful, diplomatic blankness she had expected, from a man who had spent 6 years occupying the same political world she moved in, without once crossing her path, with something that looked. And she told herself immediately that she was misreading it, that 6 years was long enough to lose fluency in a person's expressions, with something that looked like recognition, not of who she was, of who she had become. She was not prepared for that, and she had no mechanism for it, and the stone wall was cool against the fabric between her shoulder blades, and she was, despite everything, absolutely fine. She had rebuilt herself carefully. She had done it alone, in the cold, without asking anyone for anything. She had not looked back. She looked at him now, and the thing she had not expected, the thing that made the next several weeks of her life suddenly and irreversibly more complicated, was that he looked like a man who knew it. The land rights presentation was scheduled for the 3rd day of the assembly. She had 2 days. She intended to use them wisely. The hall filled again behind him. Someone called his name from the doorway. He turned toward the sound, and she took the moment. His attention shifted to straighten away from the wall and find her professional composure and reattach it, firmly, in all the places where it had briefly come loose. When he turned back, she was already moving toward the main hall. And she did not look back, and she told herself that this was because looking back was a habit she had broken, 6 years ago, in the cold. She told herself it had nothing to do with not wanting to see his face. She was not, she reminded herself, that woman anymore. She had rebuilt. The next morning arrived gray and close, the mountain air pressing down over the assembly lodge like a held breath, and Marin was at her desk before the breakfast bell, with the land survey maps spread across the table, and her second cup of tea gone cold at her elbow. She had slept in patches, which she attributed to the unfamiliar bed, and not to anything else. And she had risen early, and dressed in the dark out of the same deliberate routine that had gotten her through the first winter in the Northern Territories, when deliberate routine had been the only structure available. The presentation was 2 days away. She had her notes. She had her data. She had 6 years of documentation on the disputed territories along the northern watershed, surveys no one had thought to commission until she had. Field records that established 3 separate pack use precedents that the current boundary claims did not account for. The work was good. She knew it was good. Because she had made it good, carefully, over a long time, because the work was the thing she had been able to control when nothing else was. She was smoothing a crease from the corner of the largest survey map when there was a knock at her door. She said, "One moment," and stacked the maps in order and went to the door and opened it, expecting the junior partner from her firm, who was handling the logistical portion of the presentation. It was not him. Kalen was standing in the corridor in a working shirt. No formal jacket. The kind of clothes he apparently wore before the official day began. And he had a folder under his arm and an expression that was doing nothing to help her maintain the emotional equilibrium she had spent considerable effort establishing over the past 12 hours. "I have some questions about the Northern Watershed Survey," he said. "Your firm submitted it to the council last month. I've been reading it." She considered him. "You could ask those questions at the presentation." "I could." He did not move. His gaze held steady on her face in the way it had done last night. That quality of attention she did not have a clean name for. "I would rather ask them now, if you're willing." The corridor was empty. It was early. She could hear the distant sounds of the lodge beginning to wake, the kitchen staff, someone carrying wood past the far staircase. This was a professional request. He was the Alpha King. The land rights she was arguing for affected territory under his ultimate jurisdiction. There was nothing irregular about a preliminary meeting. She stepped back from the door and said, "I have tea." He came in, and she closed the door, and she did not examine the particular quality of the quiet that settled in the room after it clicked shut. She went to the small table and poured a second cup from the pot, which had gone cool but was still drinkable. Sat at the table's edge and sat down with her own cup, and waited while he took the chair across from her and opened the folder. He had marked it. That was the first thing she noticed. There were notations in the margins of her survey summary, precise and angular, the handwriting she recognized from the years when she had been in a position to see it. He had read it thoroughly. He had read it the way you read something you intend to argue with, or to understand. The spring precedent, he said. The third one. The documentation traces use back 90 years. 93, she said. How did you find it? A woman in the Kettering settlement remembered her grandmother mentioning it. I went and looked. She paused. There's a cairn. It's not on any current map. I found the original survey record in the Kettering archive. He looked at her. The morning light came through the narrow window behind her desk and did the same thing the candlelight had done, and she noted this and returned her attention to the map. That would have taken time, he said. I had time, she said. It's what the work required. He was quiet for a moment, turning a page in the folder. She watched his hands, which was a mistake, and redirected her attention to her tea. The Eastern Pack Council is going to challenge the precedent, he said. They'll say the 90-year claim doesn't constitute continuous use under current charter. I know, she said. I have a response to that. I'll present it at the third-day session. I know you do, he said. I read the supplementary notes. She looked up. He was watching her again. There was something in his expression that she had been trying not to look directly at since last night. The same way you do not look directly at something bright, because the after-image persists. Why are you here, Kaylin, she said, not unkindly. Not with the weight of 6 years in the question. Though she felt the weight there, had been feeling it since the herald announced his name in the hall. As a practical question, from one professional to another, in a room that was not quite warm enough at this hour of the morning. He set the folder down. He did not pretend the question was only about the survey. That was the first thing, in 6 years, that he had done that she had not been braced for. I've been following your work, he said, since the Kettering claim 3 years ago. Before that, actually, the Sorrells Pass survey was the first one that came through council with your name on it. I read it, and then I found the two before it. He paused. You built something significant. I don't think you had help. I didn't, she said. The room was quiet. Outside, someone crossed the corridor, paused, kept walking. I know, he said. And there it was. The thing she had not been braced for. Not apology. Not justification. Not the careful diplomatic construction she had prepared herself for over years of imagining this conversation. Just I know. As if knowing was a thing he had been doing at a distance. Watching her build in the cold. And had now simply brought into the room. She picked up her tea and held the cup in both hands and said, in the voice she used for difficult negotiations, the survey presentation is the day after tomorrow. I'd like to focus on that. Yes, he said. He picked up the folder. The spring precedent. Walk me through the argument. She walked him through the argument. It took over an hour. He asked precise questions and she gave precise answers. And twice they disagreed and talked the disagreement through. And by the end of it, she was standing over the spread maps, with her finger on the Kettering watershed line. And he was standing beside her at a distance that was professional and nothing else. And the morning had fully arrived outside the window. When he left, she sat back down at the table and finished her cold tea and looked at the maps for a long time without seeing them. She had rebuilt herself carefully. She had not planned for this. The second day of the assembly moved the way these events always did, in the overlapping rhythm of formal sessions and hallway negotiations and the long dining hours that were less about food than about the positioning that happened across the table. Marin sat at the land rights block with the 2 junior partners from her firm and listened and spoke when her expertise was relevant and took notes in the margins of her agenda and did not think about the morning meeting. She was thinking about the morning meeting continuously, but she was skilled at thinking about things in a compartment that ran separately from her functioning day, and she functioned well. She saw Kaylin across the main hall 3 times. Once during the morning session, where he was presiding at the head table, and she was in the 3rd row, and there was no reason for their eyes to meet, and yet they did, briefly, and he did not look away first. Once at the midday break, where she was at the beverage table, and he was passing through the hall, with 2 council members on either side of him, and his attention was fully elsewhere. And she watched him for exactly 2 seconds, before returning to the task of pouring water. Once in the late afternoon, from across the courtyard, where she had stepped out for air, and he was standing at the far wall alone, apparently doing the same thing, and he saw her see him, and neither of them moved towards the other, and after a moment, she went back inside. In the evening session, the Ravenwood PAC representative raised a preliminary objection to the watershed claims as expected, and Marin sat quietly and listened and let him finish, and then requested the floor and spent 6 minutes laying out the preliminary precedent framework with calm specificity. Not the full argument, just enough to signal that she had done the work and was not going to be rattled by an anticipatory challenge. When she sat down, the Ravenwood representative was quiet, and the counselor moderating the session moved the agenda forward. The junior partner beside her, a young man named Tobias, who was good at numbers and still learning the rest of it, leaned over and said quietly, "That was well done." She said, "Thank you," and made a note in her agenda margin, and did not tell him that 6 years of building a firm from nothing in the Northern Territories had, among other things, made her very good at not being rattled. After the evening session, she went to the small library off the east wing that she had discovered on the first day, and used as a working space in the gaps between formal obligations. It was a narrow room with high shelves and a single long table, and good lamplight, and it was usually empty at this hour. And she spread her presentation notes and did the final calibration of her argument sequence and checked her documentation cross-references, and felt, doing this, the particular quality of steadiness that work had always given her. The steadiness that she had built the firm on. The steadiness that had started, if she was honest with herself, as a substitute for the other kind. The kind that comes from being known by another person, and had become over time something real in itself. She was not sure she could have said when the substitution had quietly become the thing itself. Somewhere in the 2nd or 3rd year, somewhere between the Sorrel Pass survey and the Kettering claim, she heard the door and did not look up from her notes. "The session notes are with Tobias," she said. "He can walk you through the morning schedule." "I don't need the session notes," Kaylin said. She looked up. He was standing in the doorway with no folder this time, no professional pretext. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been trying to find the right moment to say something for longer than this evening. She set down her pen. "Sit down if you're staying," she said. "I'm still working." He sat across the table from her, and she returned to her notes, and they were quiet for a time. She was aware of him in the way she was aware of weather. That low-frequency register that was not quite conscious, and did not require her attention but did not stop. After a while she said, without looking up, "How did the eastern border situation resolve?" "It didn't," he said. "It's been referred to a joint mediation. Months of back and forth, and we're exactly where we started." He paused. "That's what the itinerary change was about. I needed to get out of that room." She made a small sound of acknowledgement and kept writing. "I've been doing a great deal of that," he said. "Being in rooms where nothing resolves." She was quiet. "Your work resolves things," he said. "The Sorrel Pass claim had been sitting in dispute for 11 years. You walked it in autumn and had a ruling by winter." "I had good documentation," she said. "You had documentation because you went and looked," he said. "You went and looked at something that 11 years of people at tables decided they could argue about without seeing." He paused again. "I've thought about that. About the difference." She put her pen down and looked at him directly. This was the thing she had been allowing herself not to do since yesterday. And she did it now because she was tired of managing around it, and because she was, despite everything, a person who looked at things directly when they mattered. "What are you doing?" she said. "Talking to you," he said. "You could have talked to me 6 years ago," she said. Not bitterly. She had processed the bitterness in the first 2 years, worked through it, in the 3rd, set it down somewhere in the 4th. What remained was not bitterness. It was a question she had never had answered, simple and factual. "You could have talked to me," he held her gaze. "I know," he said. "I know I could have." "You chose not to," she said. "Yes." The lamp between them made the shadows precise. Outside the library, the distant sounds of the assembly evening continued. Someone laughing in a far corridor, a door opening and closing. "Why are you here, Kaylan?" she said again, and this time the weight of 6 years was in it, because she was tired of carrying the weight separately from the question. He was quiet for a moment that was long enough that she thought he might be ordering himself toward honesty. "The way you order yourself toward a cold river, with the particular deliberateness of someone who knows they have been standing on the bank for too long. Because I've spent 6 years watching you build something extraordinary in the Northern Territories," he said. "And I spent the 6 years before that choosing council politics over a bond that was real. And I am aware that those are two facts about me that do not recommend me. And I am not asking you for anything. I am aware that I am not in a position to ask you for anything. Stopped then, more quietly. I wanted you to know that I see it. The work, what you've made. The room was very still. She had rehearsed this conversation in various forms in the early years. Not because she expected it, but because rehearsal was how she processed difficult things. Walking through the possible versions, in the night hours when the northern cabins were cold, and the wind moved against the walls. She had rehearsed versions where he was cold, versions where he was apologetic in the careful political way that was more about managing impressions than about truth. Versions where he had simply moved on and regarded their history as a minor incident in a long public life. She had not rehearsed this version. I know you're not asking for anything, she said. I know you know, he said, that the lamp between them, the far sound of someone in the corridor. Her notes spread on the table, 6 years of careful work. You should go, she said. I have preparation to finish. He stood. He did not argue. He did not try to extend the moment beyond what she had offered it. That, too, was unexpected. He was at the door when she said, the spring precedent. You asked this morning why I found it. The real answer is that I went looking for something that could hold weight, because I needed to know what held weight. After. She stopped. The cairn was there. It had been there for 93 years. No one had thought to look. He stood with his hand on the doorframe and looked at her, and she looked back, and the something in his expression that she had been refusing to name quietly refused to be unnamed. I should have looked, he said. Yes, she said. You should have. He left and she sat in the library alone with her notes and the lamp, and the particular quality of silence that follows a sentence that has been waiting 6 years to be said. She was not fine, she thought. She was not the tidy reconstruction she had believed herself to be. The wound was there, as present as it had ever been, only different in character. Not raw. Healed wrong, maybe, or healed right into a shape she had not examined closely enough to name. She picked up her pen. The presentation was tomorrow. The work was what she had. The work was, she reminded herself, considerable. The morning of the third day came with sudden cold sun, the mountain light arriving sharp and declarative after 2 days of gray. Maren dressed with care, not in the way she had once dressed for Kaelan's world, with the particular anxious attention to signal and impression that she could remember from 6 years ago, and regarded now with the distant interest of a person, looking at a photograph of a younger self. She dressed in the way she dressed for her own work now. The dark green again, the pins she had bought in the market at the Kettering settlement, small and amber-toned, which she wore, because she had chosen them for herself, and they were good. She ate breakfast at the long table with Tobias and the other junior partner, Sela, who was sharp and slightly combative, and would, Maren thought, eventually run her own firm if she could learn to wait for the right moment. They went through the presentation sequence one final time. The documentation was in order. The argument was clean. The third-day session opened with the land rights block, which was unusual. Typically, infrastructure claims were an afternoon matter, and when Maren entered the hall, she understood the reason. The full council was seated, and several PAC representatives who had not been present for the earlier sessions were now in attendance, and at the head table, among the council's senior members, Kaelan was seated where he had not been for the first 2 days, not presiding, present. She took her place at the presentation stand and arranged her documentation, and did not look at the head table, except as part of the general room reading she did at the start of any presentation, cataloging the energy, the receptiveness, the particular mood of an assembly that would tell her how hard she would need to work. The Ravenwood representative was in his seat with a second person beside him she had not seen before, someone with the look of a brought-in legal expert. She noted this without expression. She had expected a challenge. She had built the argument for a challenge. Maren Calloway, Northern Territories Land Rights Survey, Calloway's Survey and Land Mediation, the session moderator said. You have the floor for the first presentation, she began. She had done this enough times that the nerves, if they ever appeared now, appeared only in the first 20 seconds, and then the work took over. She knew this material, in the way you know the routes you have walked in every weather, at every hour, in the dark, the watershed geography, the spring locations, the cairn at Kettering, the 93-year use record, the 3 precedents in order of establishment, the current charter language and its relationship to historical use claims. She presented the first precedent, and the Ravenwood representative's legal expert leaned over and spoke quietly in his ear. She presented the second precedent, and the moderator's aide made a note. She presented the third. The spring, the cairn, the grandmother's memory, the archive record, the walk she had taken in the northern autumn with her boots wet and her survey equipment on her back, and the sense, crouching by a cairn that had been standing longer than most things she knew, that she was looking at something real. The use record predates the current charter by 47 years, she said. It predates the eastern boundary formalization by 61 years. What it does not predate, and what no challenge can address, is the water itself. The springs have not moved. The pack communities that depend on them have not moved. The question before this council is whether documented, continuous, established use across 3 generations constitutes a claim. My position is that it constitutes not merely a claim but an obligation. She had not planned that last word. It arrived from somewhere under the argument, from the cairn, maybe, or from the cold winters, or from the 6 years of looking at things that other people had decided they could argue about without going to see. The room was quiet in the way rooms are when something has landed. The Ravenwood representative's legal expert stood and raised the charter objection, which was precisely the one she had anticipated, and she addressed it precisely, with the documentation cross-references she had prepared. And there was a second back and forth with the council's own land rights specialist that she held her ground through without raising her voice. At the end of the back and forth, the land rights specialist said, "The Callaway documentation is thorough." He sounded slightly irritated about this. She had found, over the years, that thorough documentation produced this reaction in people who had been hoping thoroughness was negotiable. "It is," she said. The moderator called a short recess. Marin gathered her papers, and Tobias appeared at her elbow saying something about the morning going well, and she heard him at a distance, while the adrenaline that had carried the presentation settled back into its baseline. She had done the work had held. She looked up. Kalen was still at the head table, and he was looking at her, and the expression she had refused to name in the library last night, and in the gallery the night before that, and in the corridor after 6 years of absence was, she thought, looking at it directly now, simply this. He was a man who had understood too late what he had chosen to end. She did not know what to do with that. She had been building, for 6 years, a self that did not require his understanding. She had done it for practical reasons, because the alternative was to wait for something she did not believe was coming. And she was not a person who waited for things she did not believe were coming. She had built the firm. She had walked the mountains. She had found the cairn. She had built something that held its own weight. She had not built it to impress him. She needed to be clear about that, and she was clear about it. She had not built it to prove something to him. She had built it because the work was real, and because she was real, and because the life she was building was hers. And that was not about Kalen Duskmore. But the fact that he was sitting at that table and looking at her with an expression that said he knew all of this, that he had watched her build it from a distance and understood what it cost and what it meant, was not nothing. It was not nothing, and she was done pretending it was. The recess ended. The session reconvened. The moderator announced a provisional acceptance of the first and third precedents pending a formal ruling review, and tabled the second for supplementary documentation, which she had expected and already had prepared. The Ravenwood representative objected and was overruled on procedural grounds. When the session formally closed, there was the usual movement of the room, people gathering papers, conversations starting at half a dozen tables simultaneously. Tobias was next to her saying, "The second precedent documentation. Should I pull the Hartfield supplementary file?" And she was saying yes and telling him where to find it. And when she looked up again, the head table was beginning to clear, and Kalen was no longer in his seat. She found him, a moment later, at the side of the room, near the narrow windows that looked east towards the mountains. Standing alone, in the way he had stood in the courtyard yesterday. Not positioned for approach. Not positioned for avoidance. Just standing, the way a person stands when they have run out of diplomatic architecture and are simply being in a room. She crossed the hall. She did not think about it, or plan it, or prepare for it. She walked across the hall the way she had walked into the mountains in the autumn, because the thing was there and it needed to be walked toward. She stopped beside him. The window showed the morning mountains, cold and white-capped, the valleys between them shadowed. "The second precedent," she said. "The supplementary documentation. It's more thorough than the first two. It took me 18 months. He was quiet for a moment then. "I know. I read the preliminary. The ruling is going to go in the watershed community's favor," she said. "Not because of me. Because the documentation is true. Because the springs are there, and the use is real, and the cairn has been standing for 93 years, and no one can make it not have been." "I know," he said. She looked at the mountains. "I'm not the same person I was 6 years ago," she said. "I know. I'm not." She stopped, rebuilt herself from the middle of the sentence. "I am not here because of you. I am not presenting before this council because of you. I am not the person I've become because of you." "No," he said quietly. "You became her despite me. That's different. The window, the mountains, the cold sun on the high snowfields. What do you want, Kaelan?" she said. Not with heat, not with the accumulated weight of things unsaid. A clean question, asked of a person she was looking at directly. He turned from the window and looked at her, and this time she let herself read the expression fully. All of it. The thing she had been managing around for 3 days. It was not demand. It was not the particular pressure of a dominant bond asserting itself. It was quieter than that. It was the look of someone who had been watching a fire from a distance for a long time, and had finally gotten close enough to feel it, and knew the distance was their own making. "I want to know you," he said. "The person you are now. Not the person I had 6 years ago." He paused. "I am not asking you to forget the severance or to pretend it was something other than what it was. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking whether there is any path forward from here at all, and I am asking it knowing that the answer might be no, and that no would be something I had coming." She breathed. Outside, the mountains held their cold, perfect quiet. She thought about the cairn, about crouching in the autumn mud, and putting her hand on the stones that had been standing for 93 years. Not because anyone had made them stand, but because they were well built, and the work had been real. She thought about the first winter in the Northern Territories. Eating when she was not hungry, sleeping in the cold, deciding deliberately to continue. She thought about Sorrel Pass and Kettering, and the 12 properties she managed, and the 2 junior partners who were, right now, pulling documentation for a precedent ruling that would protect water rights for Pack communities that had been fighting for 11 years. She thought about the library last night, the lamp, the thing he had said, "I should have looked." She thought about what it meant that he had looked now, even if it was late, even if the looking was 6 years behind where it should have been. She was not sentimental about timing. She had learned that from the mountains. Things happened when they happened. The question was whether the thing itself was real. She looked at him. "I don't need you to know the person I was," she said. "That person is gone. What I built from what was left of her. She's in it, but she isn't what it is." "I know," he said. "If there is a path forward," she said slowly, feeling her way through the words with the same careful attention she brought to survey work, the same quality of honesty about what was visible and what was not. "It starts from where we are now, not from where we were, not from what was severed, from here, from what you've seen and what I've built, and what's actually real between 2 people who don't owe each other anything except honesty." He was very still. "From here," he said. "Yes." "That's more than I expected," he said. Not with relief, with the specific gravity of a person receiving something they know cost the giver. "It's what's available," she said. They stood at the window, not touching, not yet in any new arrangement, just standing in the morning light with the mountains outside, and the assembly hall moving and resettling around them. And the particular quality of air between 2 people who have stopped pretending and have not yet decided what to do next. It was enough, she thought. For now, it was enough. He would need to earn the rest of it, not through grand gestures or public declarations. Not through the kind of display that Pack hierarchy tended to generate around Alpha King-level apologies. She had no interest in spectacle. She had spent 6 years being invisible in the Northern Territories and doing the work, and had found that the work itself was the testimony. She would need him to show up with the same quality of attention he had given the survey folders. Over time, without assumptions, he would need to understand that the bond, whatever remained of it, whatever had survived the severance and the 6 years and the rebuilding, was not something she was prepared to simply follow. She had learned not to follow. She had learned to walk her own line and survey her own ground and trust her own documentation. If there was to be something between them, it would have to walk alongside her on that line. Not behind her, not in front. Alongside. She thought he might understand this. The morning session. The way he had asked questions rather than directed conclusions. The way he had said I know and meant it rather than using it as a conversational close. The way he had sat at the presentation table, not as a presider but as someone who had come to listen. She thought he might. She was not certain. She was not in the business of certainty. She was in the business of documentation. The afternoon session was scheduled to begin in an hour. She had a second presentation to prepare for, and a supplementary file to review, and 2 junior partners waiting on her direction. She looked at the mountains one more time. I need to get back to work, she said. Yes, he said. She turned from the window. She had taken 3 steps when she heard him say, quietly, behind her, the cairn, when you found it. What did it feel like? She stopped. Did not turn. She thought about it, the cold ground, the weight of the stones. The 93 years of standing in weather that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with what was real. Like finding something that had been holding weight the whole time, she said, without anyone knowing. She walked back into the hall. The afternoon session was long and detailed, and she was present for all of it, precise and thorough and unrattled by the continued Ravenwood objections. And when it was over, the preliminary rulings were better than she had projected. The third precedent confirmed, and the second referred for a 30-day documentation review. She was confident she would pass. Tobias said it was the best land rights outcome in 3 sessions of assembly that he could find on record. She said thank you and meant it, and bought him dinner at the long table and listened to him talk about the second precedent strategy with the attention it deserved. She did not look for Kalen at dinner. She did not look for him. He was present in the room, and she was aware of that presence in the same way she was aware of the mountains outside. Real and significant, and part of the landscape, not required and not gone. After dinner, she walked the east corridor alone. The same route she had taken the first evening when she needed air. The mountain cold came through the narrow window at the corridor's end, clean and dark and smelling of pine, and the particular mineral sharpness of snowmelt. The smell of her life in the Northern Territories, the life she had built. She stood at the window for a while. She thought about the faded bond, which she had not thought about directly for years, or had thought about by not thinking about it, which was its own kind of attention. It had been there 6 years ago. She had felt it, and she had believed it, and she had stood in a public assembly hall, and heard him sever it in an even voice without looking at her, and she had understood. In that moment, that feeling a bond was not the same as having it honored. She had believed somewhere in the first year that the bond had ended with the severance. That was what she had told herself, that what she felt afterward was grief and not longing and not the particular pull of something that had been formally dissolved, but had not actually stopped. Standing at this window now, 6 years later, she thought that she had not been honest with herself about that. The bond had not stopped. It had gone dormant in the way. Mountain springs went dormant in the freeze, underground, invisible, still moving. She did not know what that meant for the path forward. The path forward was hers to define. She had said that, and she had meant it. But she was also now, standing at a window in the cold, thinking about a man who had read her survey documentation, with marked up margins, and said I should have looked, and feeling something that was not the grief she had carried, and not the clean separation she had constructed, and not the careful professional composure she had maintained for 3 days. Feeling something that was, if she was going to be honest with herself in the way the cairn work required honesty, more like the spring than the freeze. She breathed. The mountains were dark outside, lit only by the cold stars, and the wind moved through the pines in the valley below, with a sound like water over stone. She had rebuilt herself carefully. She had done it alone, in the cold, and what she had built was real and was hers, and was not contingent on anyone else's recognition to remain true. She knew that. What she also knew, standing at this window, was that being known was not the same as being contingent. She had conflated those 2 things in the years of rebuilding, had told herself that needing nothing from anyone was strengthened, and it was. It had been. It was the kind of strength the situation had required, but it was not the only kind. The kind that stood in an assembly hall and said, what holds weight is what has been there the whole time. That was real too, the kind that went looking for a cairn, the kind that said, from here, from what is actually real. She turned from the window. The corridor was empty. She walked it back toward her room with her notes under her arm, and the cold mountain smell of her life in her lungs and the knowledge, quiet and clear as good survey work, that she was not the woman she had been when she left this world 6 years ago, and that the man who had spent 6 years watching her become this woman was not the same man who had delivered the severance in an even voice without meeting her eyes. She did not know what they would make of that difference. She intended to find out. Not because she needed him. Not because the bond compelled her toward anything she had not chosen, but because the work of a life, done honestly and carefully over time, eventually required you to document what was real, including the things you had been surveying from a distance, because you were afraid of what the close-up would show. She had not survived the last 6 years by being afraid of what the close-up showed. She was not going to start now. The assembly formally closed on the fourth morning, and the rulings were recorded, and the packs began their departures in the crisp early cold. Marin supervised the packing of her documentation with Tobias and Sella, and said what she needed to say about the next steps on the second precedent review, and arranged the transport of the survey materials, and did all of the practical closing work with her characteristic thoroughness, because the work was real and deserved real attention. She was carrying the last of the survey rolls to the transport cart when Kalen appeared at the lodge steps. He was in his travel clothes, the kind of functional, undramatic kit of someone preparing for a long northern route. He had apparently been watching her load the cart, because when she turned around he was already looking at her, not with surprise, just with the same quality of attention she had been learning to read over the past 3 days. The eastern border mediation is in 6 weeks, he said. The watershed territories are adjacent to the dispute zone. She set the survey roll in the cart and straightened. I know. The council will likely want updated survey data for the mediation. They'll want it, she said. Whether they commission it or not is another question. I'm commissioning it, he said. Formally, through the council, your firm. She looked at him. That's not about anything other than the fact that your documentation is the best I've seen, he said. And then, evenly, without pretending the other thing was not also true, and that I want a reason to see your work, not because I'm owed access to it, because it's worth seeing. She had her coat on against the morning cold, the heavy northern wool she had bought in the Kettering market 2 winters ago. The mountain light was doing the thing it had done throughout the assembly, precise and declarative, the kind of light that left nothing approximate. You'll need to go through the formal commission process, she said. Tobias handles the intake. Yes, he said. The timeline for updated watershed survey is approximately 3 months, given the snowpack schedule. I understand. She looked at him in the mountain light for a moment. This man who had spent 6 years watching her become someone he hadn't known to look for when he'd had her, who had come to this assembly with marked-up survey folders and said I should have looked, who was standing here now not asking her to come back or to forgive, or to dissolve the 6 years of careful reconstruction into a reunion that served his regret, who was asking specifically to see her work, to be in proximity to what she had built, to earn the rest of it, if there was a rest of it, over time. She thought about the cairn. She thought about what holds weight the whole time, without anyone knowing. 3 months, she said. I'll be in the northern territories. The surveying starts when the snowmelt makes the lower trails passable. I'll make sure the commission is processed this week, he said. She nodded once, picked up her bag, started down the lodge steps. She was at the bottom when she stopped. She had not planned to stop. She was not, in general, a person who stopped on the way out of things, but she turned around and looked up at him, standing on the steps above her in the mountain's light, and said, The cairn is 2 days north of the Kettering settlement. The trail markers are wrong on the current maps. You'd need a guide who knows the adjustment. He was very still. I know the adjustment, she said, and then, because it was true, and because the documentation of real things required saying the real things, I'd show you, if you wanted to sit. The mountain light lay flat and clear across the lodge steps, and the valley below, and the peaks above, the same light that had been falling on the northern territories for all the years she had walked them alone, building something from what was left, finding cairns in the cold, documenting what held weight. I would very much like to see it, he said. She turned back toward the road, and the transport cart, and the journey north, and carried in her chest the particular quality of something that had been underground, and moving for a very long time, beginning, now, carefully and honestly. and in the full light of everything that was real, to surface.